This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to talk to Margaret Gardner, the Vice-Chancellor of Monash University. Margaret and I have known each other forever. We first met each other at Griffith University during one of the very first love-ins, and I still remember those conversations we had. You were head of school and I was acting dean at the Gold Coast. So our careers have run in parallel, and yours has been eminent. And I think you're now the longest serving Vice-Chancellor in Australia.
I understand that might be the case, yes.
Congratulations. I'm sure you've got some good stories to tell and some reflections on what's happening now in particular. But I asked you to bring an object that represented your leadership journey, but also your experience as a learner. So what have you brought for us?
Well, I looked at that and I thought, I don't have an object except in the abstract. This isn't. So this is a book.
Yes.
And my journey as an educator, both from being educated and participating in it, being an educator in universities, really the book has been central. So even though we work in so many digital forms, I would have to say that my journey began and remains deeply tethered to the book as a repository of wonderful ideas that stimulate the understanding we have of the world and are the way you learn from others and give you the ideas that you largely communicate to others. Now, when I say the book, of course, that includes journal articles, and we read a lot of books digitally now, and we read a lot of material digitally, but I would say it is the considered argument, if you like, in written form. And I don't know how else you do that other than wave a sort of metaphorical book around.
So do you also use the book or reading as part of your relaxation?
Oh yes. I have, perhaps like many people in our field, have always read. I still read. I regard the reading of fiction and indeed non-fiction. I find my interest in non-fiction is slightly reduced since work involves a lot of non-fiction.
Yeah.
But reading is a source of joy, and development and relaxation, and it's the first thing I would do and the last thing I would do.
So what are you reading at the moment?
Oh, well, in fact, the book I'm waving around at the moment, and I should have read it a little earlier than this, this one is written by another Vice-Chancellor whom I know, called The Pursuit of Possibility. So Nigel Thrift, redesigning Research University. So I'm reading that. I am reading, in fiction terms, I started John Banville's The Singularities. Is probably the most recent fiction I've opened. Yes, and prior to that, for all sorts of bizarre reasons, I read, although it's been a long time since she's written, Penelope Fitzgerald's Offshore, which is a Booker-winning from a long time ago, because I had, for various reasons, an opportunity to talk with Hermione Lee, who wrote a biography of Penelope Fitzgerald, and I thought, dear, I mean, Hermione Lee's written, Dame Hermione Lee has written on Virginia Woolf, I think was probably her first substantial biography, but she's also written on Penelope Fitzgerald. And I thought, oh, now there's an author I've never read. Why haven't I read her? And I thought I'd pull that up. And yeah, I like crime fiction. Maybe last year sometime I worked my way systematically through all the Dorothy L. Sayers.
All right.
Because Gaudy Nights is so interesting. Anyway, you can tell I like fiction, and probably the non-fiction I read most. Now, so that's a book.
Yeah.
But I spend a lot of time picking up blog writers on higher education,
Yes,
like
yes.
Andrew Norton and
Yeah.
Alex Usher, and and I've always loved what Gavin Moody writes and his commentary. So, if I'm reading in higher education, yes, I would look at published pieces and articles that are written, but I also keep an eye on the blogs.
And what about podcasts? Do you listen to podcasts as well?
I don't listen to podcasts. This is, no, that's not entirely true. When I listen to podcasts is if I'm on a long drive.
Right.
And I know a lot of people put, earpods in and do that while they're running, but I'm not a runner. So I have to be sitting in a car to listen to a podcast, and usually a long car journey. And yeah, so it gets to be rather a holiday type of thing rather than a workday sort of thing.
So when you think of your career as a Vice-Chancellor in two very large, complex universities, you couldn't get to universities more complex than RMIT and Monash. What have the highlights been in your role as Vice-Chancellor and leading such complex international organisations?
There are two things there. The outcomes you hope for, if you talk intellectually about as you approach them, the thing I have had most enjoyment and satisfaction from in the approach is putting a lot of time and thought into what will effectively pick from their history and culture the things that they can distinctively contribute in education and research, both in Australia and in the case of the universities I've been in beyond Australia. And so university strategy is an abiding and deep interest, and I'm interested in it in the way it connects with culture, and in the way it then is able to sharpen the sorts of outcomes that people might provide. So we get different, if you like, different ways of thinking about how we might deliver education and research in universities, education and research and the services around them that you take as given. As institutions, there's a level of things that are important in value terms, particularly to universities of the types that we work in, but it's then how that might be expressed. And therefore, it forces you to think in ways, in different ways about how you might think of education, the educational experience, the shape and profile of it, the experience that you provide, and the same with research. And the thinking about that and then the thinking through how it might best be implemented is intellectually very satisfying. If you talk about the actual immediate joy you get, the great thing about universities is the opportunities you get and can be in, whether it's, and you don't get so much of this as a Vice-Chancellor, the ability to sit and listen, and every now and then I get a chance to listen to someone talk deeply about something in their field, to watch a student do some sort of exposition about what they're doing, because it's to watch someone with a passion for what they're doing explicate and talk to others about what they're learning, and you learn in a whole series of ways from that. I particularly like the conversation, so the bringing leadership together, bringing groups of staff together and hearing them reflect on, they might be strategic questions, they might be other things. At the moment, because our strategy says that we will be concentrated on impact and we will worry, so our excellence has to deliver with others an impact, and that impact will be on 3 global challenges: climate change, geopolitical security, and fostering thriving communities. So we've opened up a conversation process across the university, first with staff, and it will out to alumni, to industry partners, to staff and students in the university, and then out to alumni and industry on those 3 themes, and just watching people address them, because it's a conversation to say, when we look at these 3 themes, what capabilities do we have? What might we do? What should we be doing? How will we work with others? Those sorts of conversations in which people bring their expertise and bring all that expertise to new ideas, I've got to say, in the moment, they are some of the most satisfying things you see. And then you hope you see really solid outcomes. Like there are things, you know, you're always watching. God, the most depressing thing is trying to move the dial, as you know, on education, and whether you're delivering an education that is making the sort of impact and outcome for students that you want. So, God, I've spent a long time, like all of us, looking at those and cogitating on what things seem to make the dial move, and could you do better? Watching successes in research, which I must say we are much better at measuring, and seem to actually be able to see things develop in satisfying ways. And so watching what those outcomes are. And the other one is, that's also very hard to move the dial on, but beyond education, is have you got access to people irrespective of background into your university? Have you got the appropriate diversity? And I'm most worried about the way socioeconomic disadvantage, of course, plays through a whole series of other gender, race, ethnicity, culture. So worrying about moving those sorts of outcomes so that you are actually making the university accessible. So watching those numbers, I like statistics, is, I wouldn't say enjoyable, but is something you find you're constantly going back to and reflecting on, and wondering about the things you thought that worked back when you started and what you think you know about them now. I'd love to say, you like to think you're learning.
I remember a number of years ago when you were the chair of the Office of Learning and Teaching Committee that I was on as well. And this has stayed with me, and it's a number of years since that happened. But you described yourself as an educator and a change agent. And would you still describe yourself as an educator and a change agent? But for me, that was extraordinarily powerful, and it was very real because of the Margaret I have known over 1,000 years.
I don't might have become. So what I would say is that I have always hoped to be a change agent. I went into leadership. I sometimes joke I'm very bad at taking direction from anybody else, but that only makes me like most academics. But it's actually the ability to work with others to see if you can actually get the things you think should be happening to happen. And so in that sense, change agent, activist by nature, yes, it is something now, whether what I'm doing is having good outcomes is the thing you're constantly worrying about, but yes, that would be true. And I am very fundamentally interested in education, even though like everybody, I began as an academic. You do a research degree, you're interested in your research questions. But the minute I started effectively teaching undergraduates, I became really interested in the way we captured a field of knowledge in the structure of the curriculum. And I worried about whether assessment did anything useful, what things you did. So even as an early academic, I had a lot of interest and did a lot of work on curriculum design, whether good or bad, and assessment, new forms of assessment to try and convey through that to students the sorts of things that you think will develop both the understanding and the other capabilities that you hope you're doing through an education. So I have remained interested in education, as you know, was involved. And I think one of the great losses for the sector was the Office for Learning and Teaching at the federal level. I'm not sure still that most people understand that the work that was done, particularly with the people who were taking ideas and looking at how they could disseminate them across the sector. And we did research work right at the end of that process, and they were having an impact and changing practice and disseminating good practice and new practices through the sector, a new curriculum. Australia had something really, really valuable there. And just, I don't mean people aren't still worrying about it and talking to one another about it, but we had an institutional way of giving it impetus and we lost it.
And it made teaching important. It made teaching respectable and respected.
Yes.
And there was a repository. I mean, I still go back sometimes from time to time to find out, what projects were done some time ago. And they are defensible, they're high quality. Do you think there's any appetite with this Minister for Education to not replace it but put something in place that respects and can generate teaching ideas?
I think the current minister has a really genuine interest in education and educational outcomes, and I think it's up to us to put the case for it in front of him.
Right, yes. So, yes, the sector actually has to make the first move.
Yes, I think it's up to us. If we don't say we value it, why would the minister say that he should tell us how we should go about improving educational practice? We should be talking to him about what we actually know has been effective.
So can we just divert the conversation a little bit to your experience as a student? What was your experience as an undergraduate and then a postgraduate student like?
Well, I probably had a relatively conventional for the time educational experience in both. And I mean, so I was a child who loved school and I loved school, and I came to university and I loved university. Perhaps not surprising. Now, what actually happened, and I do find sometimes, because people talk about golden ages, and I'm old enough to often be to have been taught in the apparent golden age that they think happened. I was in very big classes. My first year classes had hundreds of students. I did an economics degree. I was in tutorials that had up to 30 people in a tutorial. This sort of notion of this tiny little, cosseted group, no. I was in big classes. They were taught with the variability in quality that we would not tolerate now. But I did have people who taught brilliantly and were inspiring. I had people who were who you could see channeling how they'd been taught. So I had someone who was taught as an undergraduate at Oxbridge, and I understood as I saw this young lecturer, talking to us, often carrying piles of books with bits of paper sticking out of them and referring to them, that we were getting their experience of of lectures in Oxford. It was really interesting. So you could see how people were taught. So some of the lectures were brilliant, some of them were dire. Some of the tutorials were fascinating, some of them were, less interesting. This experience with other students was wonderful. We had a specialist library that we hung out in and talked very loudly in and just had a huge amount of fun in. And it was at a time when they broke people into honours streams after first year.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were in big classes, but if you got into the honours stream on the basis of your results, and I did, you had extra teaching. So you were doing more than everybody else, but the more was in smaller classes. And so the feeling of being really seriously engaged, like we talked about what we were doing in university and out of university.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I went to be a postgrad, I was also tutoring undergraduates.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact designing curriculum, because I happened to be in an area where where we were allowed to have a huge amount of say, interestingly. And so the supervisory experience was, again, cohort of other PhD students who are all interested in the same thing. We talked endlessly about things. We went out together, went to pubs and restaurants. And so we had the student experience you might expect in the social sense, and in a sense that is just wonderful, where what you do is talk ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And periodically staff members came along.
Mm-hmm. And then compare with what you see now in terms of the student experience?
Well, I think I think indeed the way their classes are structured is like immensely superior. that all the underpinning of it, the what is available, how it is made available to them. I had no concept that you could go overseas, and yet we offer every one of our undergraduates an overseas experience, and our large numbers of them, completely inconceivable. So they have potential for much richer experiences in those ways, much better structured teaching. I think we put a lot more time into supporting teachers to be innovative, and I think the base standard is better. So I think the truly dire have disappeared, and what you might call the standard has lifted dramatically. I think, so I was in big classes, and I got a cohort experience because I was in an honours class. I cannot tell you what it felt like for the other students in my year who would have been in much larger and more amorphous groups. And I went through at a time when we were all in a bit of a ferment about protest. So there were all sorts of ideas floating around, and we engaged with them in different ways. But in our case, to be blunt, it was actually mostly about the ideas of the fields we're in. I think we are working hard to structure that in. I think if you're in professional degrees, you get that experience. And to be blunt, an economics degree was a professional degree in that sense anyway. But as a lot of degrees have got bigger, building that cohort experience that I had is harder to do, and we work hard at it. But that standard of teaching and all the other opportunities, God, they are amazing compared to what we had available to us. And I think in postgraduate terms, students are given a much more structured and supportive experience. In the universities I've been in as they go through a PhD, we sort of you were very dependent on your supervisor. You were lucky if you had a cohort, as I had, that we came through at the same time. You might not. There was much more chance of you falling off the edge of the cliff and falling into the pond and not getting your head up again. So I loved it, but I learned lots of things that could be better.
And have you tried then in your practice in the various positions you've had in the universities you've worked to sort of translate some of those observations that you had where there were room for improvement into the programs?
Yeah, I actually think, and we've put a lot of time into this at different times and come to, I think, hopefully better and different understandings over time about how. I think the nature of the cohort experience is real, and I've reflected on that, is really, really important. And trying to give people their tribe, and their tribe might be, as mine was, in their field, or it might be out of another set of experiences. I think you've got to work not to force people into tribes, but to give people those opportunities and try and draw them into that situation. Because when I went to university, there was almost no one from my high school there. I didn't know anybody. And so I met somebody else, 2 other people, in my first year who I didn't know from a bar of soap, and they looked very sophisticated to me compared to me. And I knew them when I finished my undergraduate degree. We ended up, all of us, doing slightly different honours degrees, but that was chance. I knew, therefore, that kids get to university and it's there and they've got no other experience of it. And so getting those sorts of experiences right is important. I'm conscious that trying to get variety of experience in to give people the shock of the new is really important, I think, even if it's a bit uncomfortable. Just dragging people slightly. So there are things I think I got, some of them by chance, that I think are good to try and provide opportunities for people to do. And I observed some pretty poor quality teaching in my time, and what I'd call not good processes in various ways. I didn't experience any, dreadful things, but you could see in that environment that dreadful things might have happened to people. You might have been lucky. And so I'm quite conscious of the support that has to be around people, so that you give them the best chance, you can.
So when we graduated, because you and I are both Capricorns, and there's 10 days difference between our birthdays. There were jobs available for us to get, and so it was actually much more relaxed. Students now, there's not that sense of doing a sort of a generalist degree and then deciding what you're going to do. There's been over the last 15 years the vocationalization of degrees. Do you think that has been successful, or do you think that there's a real place for generalist degrees and then specializations, a bit like the parallel degree from Melbourne?
Look, so I did not actually do a generalist degree. People might think an economics degree is generalist now. I went to university to be an economist. I intended to work for the Treasury or the Reserve Bank. I am very little different in that from very many hundreds and thousands of undergraduates who start now who have an idea that they want to do this and that they should want to do this because they're going to have to support themselves at the end of it. So I fully understand that impulse. I don't think people should be directed away from that impulse. I also think other people say, oh, I'm not sure, and I feel I'm good at this and that. And so I feel we do offer generalist degrees, and they're great things, and they give people that ability to explore, and I think that's a good thing. There was no way I could ever have contemplated not being able to support myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I had scholarships at every turn from the end of primary school all the way through. So I am not someone who talks down vocational degrees, because the joys of all the ideas I encountered through an economics degree in which I did everything from the political economy of women through to psychology 1, that they were great things that you might, explore many different ideas in an arts degree or a science degree. Yes, good. That people have the opportunity to choose, and that it's high quality, and that it is not narrow and instrumentalist in its curriculum conception, I think is the key.
Yeah, no, I agree. But sometimes accreditation,
yes,
and registration actually does provide some limitations, which...
It does. And we have to be stronger sometimes, I feel, as educators in our discussion with professional bodies about what is appropriate. And my observation with often the big ones, like if engineering accreditation, accounting accreditation, they've always, in my observation, talking, for example, to those panels, have understood that people need a breadth of understanding that they're bringing, not just technically, I can do this, this and this. So that's partly down to us, but I haven't found them unresponsive. I also think this other set of things we offer in universities, like we've got kids currently at the moment designing Mars rovers and high-powered rocketry and electric cars and different forms of IT systems and how they design new things, working on all sorts of things in those ways, or working in, all our law students are guaranteed a clinical experience. They go in and work with solicitors, and they're working on everything from elimination of the death penalty in Southeast Asia through to how do I give advice to a tenant in a rental. So it's all the other things we offer that allow people to explore different parts of their possible world, because university, and you can see this as you get older, is one of the great experiences. And the only regret I have is, as someone who travelled a long distance backwards and forwards on the train, I didn't really hang around much I didn't join student societies and things like that. And really there's so much for university, and you'll always have regrets about things you didn't do, but you want to make sure that other people have those opportunities.
Yeah. So getting back to you as an educator, what's driven you as an educator, both as a practitioner, as a lecturer, but also as a Vice-Chancellor?
What has driven me? You've got an idea of what you are hoping to achieve, whether it's through a strategy for a whole organisation or through a design in a class, and you're trying to achieve that to the best of your ability with other people. And so, like everybody else, you're driven to do the best of what you can do, and that doesn't make, I don't think, me any different from anybody, whatever they're doing. It's just the field you're playing on. I am, however, particularly driven to stay in universities, because you could say, well, you know, I did an economics degree, I taught management, why didn't you, you know, here I am, you know, Vice Chancellor, but, you know, Chief Executive Officer in that sense. Why didn't you just go into another field? And the truth is that the underpinning thing that drives me is I believe in the huge importance of education for people's lives and opportunities. And I don't mean just their ability to get a job. I mean the quality of their life, the quality of our society, the discourse, the civic quality, civic and cultural quality of our life. I think universities are really important contributors and have to be developed and have to be preserved, but they have to be developed, and to do that as well as to provide the opportunities that make lives so much better. I mean, I came from a family where my family said, you know, education will make the difference, and I certainly could see and observe what happened without it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that opportunity for people, but I've got to say, God, the joy of watching people discover. So that combination of things in universities is a beautiful thing. And so, yes, I would like to achieve what I think are the objectives, and I would like to achieve it well, but it's because those things matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually because it's not just anywhere I want to do it. It's in universities.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk to these about the student experience, the current student experience, where do you think some areas of improvement might be? Because sadly, for many students, they have to work. Mature age students have family obligations. So to have that experience that you waxed so positively about,
yeah.
what needs to be changed so that there is that opportunity to actually grow up in university?
I do think we have to try, and that's why I am heavily focused on the cohorts and that education, the broader educational experience, not just the teaching in the class. So you have to give people the opportunity to really build capability. I really dislike the notion that you know, the lectures are really important. They're important actually for the way you gain from a lecturer perspectives on things and passion and engagement. But really driving people into class group activities that give them both that ability to try things themselves and to debate. You need to give them active engagement. It's a horrible cliche, but it's actually true. And that's what makes the experience great. So how do you structure things in different ways? They may not get it in. You may not like every subject. You may not, you enrolled in X and think partway through, oh, well, that was really not really a bright idea. I'm sure not everybody's interested in everything. And I have to remember that all the time, because I loved everything. I was always, it was interesting, but that is not the way the world is. And so people have opportunities to be engaged and to be actively engaged themselves. And so trying to work out how you do that in a situation so that they can get the best out of it. So I'm very focused on scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
Scholarships that are big enough to give people enough time to reflect and get the aha moment, so that they don't feel that they're there for that moment. I don't care if you're tired from the night before and falling asleep at 2:30 as I used to do sometimes, because you're tired from the night before. It's not great for taking in what happened in that lecture, but I don't want them doing that and feeling that I just have to get through this and I can't engage with it. So scholarships are really important to me. Can we get more of them? Can they be of a sufficient level? Our best scholarships, we structured in things so that people could go overseas, because if you don't have money, you're not going to have an overseas experience, because basically you can't afford it. You can't afford to stop working, you can't afford to go overseas. So trying to give people the room, and then structure it so there are opportunities for them to get that very best. Because even if it is difficult because people have to work, even if it is difficult because of time, we have to structure ourselves so that they get the opportunity to do that. That means we have to look at our timetables. We have to look at how we structure activities. We have to look at how we support them. And you just have to keep working away at those things, because your objective is that they will get that feeling of active engagement, that at some point they will have an aha moment, that when they look back, they'll go, God, that was the thing that really made a difference. That was the idea I'm carrying with me. You want them to have the joy of it.
Mm. Our universities have continued to grow, and I still remember the CFO at Sydney University when I was there saying, universities don't thrive by shrinking.
Yes.
Do you think our universities have grown too large and have become too complex to be able to deliver that experience that you talked about before, particularly the cohort experience?
I think it's challenging. I think we have grown and we've had to grow to get, bluntly, a lot of what's driving it is how you deliver quality education when, there's a sort of constant efficiencies being driven through the funding that's coming to you. And in fact, in a world, particularly at the research intensive end, where high quality research has become increasingly itself large and expensive, there's a certain scale to support certain levels of and types of research endeavour and certain levels and types of quality of education to get the balance right. And that means you are having to work out then, how do you give people that cohort experience, because it's not going to come because they just happen to be in a class with 10 students. But as I point out, the notion that there was some golden years, at least in Australia when that happened, I was in an elite, as they are called now, group of 8 university, and my classes were large. They were large then. So there were ways that happened then because of the way things were structured, but it may only have happened, it may have been that I was getting a particular experience because of what I was doing in the degree I was in with the particular outcomes. We have to intentionally design to make sure we give that. So, for example, my own university, we focused on Monash, rich educational experiences. We're sending people in cohorts to, in our case, to mostly the places where we've got campuses because we can support them. They're not out of the same degree. They're out of different degrees. They are undergraduates. They have got things to do. It's not a whole semester, it's a shorter period of time. But that is driving them out into an experience where they confront a series of ideas, a series of experiences. They build connections with one another. That's intentionally attempting to create for them an experience that they might get in the degree they're in, but they might not. And because of the way the classes are structured or what subjects they've decided to do. So if we can structure it in, we can we can work towards giving them those opportunities. I think you've just got to work really hard at it. I don't think you can infinitely get larger and larger. I don't think that's the case either. But I think there's not for all universities, but if you're attempting to do certain sorts of research in certain sorts of places, then I think the way funding flows at the moment, it drives you to a particular sort of size, which makes Australian universities in the main larger on average than a lot around the world. And until those things change, yeah, we might not grow a lot larger, but we will be large.
Yeah. So my final question, I started with you, so I'm going to end with you. You have been a Vice-Chancellor for, 15 years.
Yeah, a bit more probably, yeah.
Okay. So how has the role in that 15 plus years, how has the role of Vice-Chancellor changed? And what's your greatest learning from being a Vice-Chancellor? I thought I'd finish on an easy one.
Yes, I was going to say. Well, of course, the thing about any leadership role is it's very heavily affected by context. So I'm not talking, I wouldn't talk in the abstract about how the role of Vice-Chancellor has changed, though I will say this. As universities become on average larger and more complex, and as they are more, I can talk here from the ones I've been in, as they are more engaged, not in more structured ways, in relationships with philanthropic organisations, which they are now than they were when I started, more engaged with big industry partners, I think, on a broader range of fronts than they were, more commercialisation or translation, if you like, of research than there was. So the complexity and the range of what is being done, along with the on average increasing scale, makes the jobs considerably more complex. It's like any leadership role. If it's small enough that you can do it face to face, then what you need to understand, how you need to do it, how you need to get things done is completely different to operating. So in my case, we've got multiple wholly controlled entities, multiple offshore campuses, multiple spin-outs in which we hold equity, engagement with philanthropy. And what I'm describing for me, probably offshore campuses more unusual, but a lot of those things are true, have expanded for universities. That makes the job more complex, more multi-layered, and puts a huge premium on the way you build a leadership team and engage with them. These are not Lone Ranger type of jobs. So that's changed, and the complexity, therefore, of the leadership structures underneath you have grown. So the whole leadership task in universities has increased in scale and complexity. But it is also true that circumstance changes. The difference between, when I started at RMIT, they had a big budget deficit. So the first thing you have to worry about is the budget deficit, because it was actually a cash deficit. So, that's about paying people.
It's lucky you're an economist.
But in doing that, I also, at the same time, worked on what the strategy should be for the next 5 years. And so you're having to remedy one thing and discuss the future in another. It's a sort of interesting tension. Going through COVID, when you can't predict what's happening, like day to day, you can't see, we're used to long run relatively long-run planning and understanding, and largely incremental movements. This was highly disruptive. So that places a different stress on leadership. So the truth is, there's that arc in what a Vice-Chancellor does, but the things that happen over time in a particular organisation or in the context around you will demand different things of people, and that will test and might be entirely different aspects of what you've, how you've learnt to do what you do. And so you have to be constantly learning and watching. And it's probably true, though not, I suspect, largely confined to the higher ed sector. There's probably a bit more public scrutiny of Vice-Chancellors than there once was. And so, you know, more likely to be called into those conflictual, because public scrutiny usually attaches to some form of conflict. So there's probably a little bit more of that now than there once was, but I'm not going to overstate it. I think that's just the impact of social media on all sorts of leadership. I'm not going to overstate it for universities. So those things have probably changed. And the notion for all leaders in universities that you can just roll up to it, roll up your sleeves and sort of apply a bit of native intelligence, which was probably never the case. You know, people are always trying to seek people who seem to have demonstrated that they can do this and that. But, you know, the notion that somehow you could roll in and roll out, you know, and I've been elected for this many years and I'll do this for a bit and then no, they're actually not amenable to that, because it is too complex a job, and the ability to implement strategy requires an ability to work with numbers of people, both their community, staff and students, but a leadership group who are also communicating with that community, because you're not going to talk to them one-on-one everywhere, because it's not possible. So you are, you have to understand the nature of the task. I would hope the thing that hasn't changed is what you're there for. You know, the thing that the university matters, that it's there, like institutions, they're there for a long period of time. Circumstances change, you're there to help advance it, and that you're a steward for a time. That's, you know, you can't decide, you're not there like saying, I think we've decided to move out of cereal and into fruit juice. You are actually, you have to be committed to the mission. There might be particular mission for your university, that's what you're trying to give expression to strategically. The overarching mission of the university, you better be there for that, I think. I think it matters. I think it's not that sometimes I care about this sort of organisation and another point I care about that organisation. No. The fundamentals of how we build knowledge, why we build knowledge, how we communicate knowledge, how we work with students, they're really fundamental things, and you have to be committed to those values. Yeah. You sit on the academic board as one person, one voice, one vote. Not so. I firmly believe there are things about the collegium that is the university that you're there the long term for, and that's not going to change.
And on that note, thank you for spending nearly an hour on a Friday afternoon talking to me. I've had a great time. I've hoped that you've also enjoyed it. And Margaret, I wish you all the best for 2023, and I hope that there aren't challenges that you can't manage. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. You have been a great colleague, a great educator, and it's always a joy to talk with you.
Thank you. And I'll see you in Canberra.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
Visit studiosity.com/Students First for the next Students First Symposium, an open forum for faculty, staff and academics to candidly discuss and progress the issues that matter most in higher education.